Hello, everybody. Welcome to Patriot's History. This is where we read through a Patriot's history of the United States from Columbus to Trump, and I will provide you with all sorts of analysis and discussion along the way. This is actually lesson 8. I know I mixed up some of the lesson numbers earlier. They're all put together now. It's all correct now. I was going to number them by chapter 1, lesson 1, lesson 2, but I decided no, let's just go sequentially through the whole book. So from now on, every lesson will be the next lesson will be 9, so on and so forth. Okay, last time we had looked at Jamestown and colonial Virginia, and I want to continue today discussing the colonial South, and then we will get to Bacon's Rebellion, which is a pretty interesting rebellion here in very early America. So let's get started. Now, once again, as just in case we have new people, I am always using the Patriot's History of the United States 15th Anniversary Edition. A lot of people say, is this available in hardcover? No. The only hardcover you can get is the original 2004 edition. Every edition since then has been paperback. So the page numbers I'm giving you are from this. You can use the header and some of the paragraph starting sentences, first sentences, to figure out where we are if you have a different edition. But we are in the colonial South, chapter 1, City on a Hill. And actually the header that is part of this section, I started with the colonial South. This is Tobacco, Slaves, and Representative Government. Tobacco, Slaves, and Representative Government, and we're just about to finish this section. And so I'm on page 23, Patriot's History of the United States, and I am starting in the first full paragraph. By that time, and we're talking about roughly 1618, 1619, by that time the Virginia Company had attracted considerable attention in England, none of it good. The king appointed a committee to look into the company's affairs and its perceived mismanagement. Reflecting the fact that English investors, by then experiencing the fruits of commercial success at home, expected even more substantial returns from their successful operations abroad than they had received. Opechancaw's raids seemed to reinforce the assessment that the London directors could not make prudent decisions about the colony's safety, and in 1624, the Court of King's Bench annulled the Virginia Company's charter, and the king assumed control of the colony as a royal province. All right, a couple of things about this. Going back to our pillars of American exceptionalism, pillar number 2, common law. Jamestown did not have common law. They did not select their own leaders. Their leaders were selected from the company in England, in London, and then later by the king. And so this is important. I'm going to go on to make the argument that Jamestown, Virginia, was not the origin of American exceptionalism. Now, hear me out. I didn't say it wasn't the origin of America or the United States of America or English presence in America. I said it was not the origin of American exceptionalism because the Jamestown colonists lacked the first 2 key pillars of American exceptionalism. They were Anglicans, so they did not have a bottom-up religious structure. They were top-down, governed by the king and the Church of England. Now, second of all, as you can see, they are not bottom-up governance. They don't elect their own leaders. The London Company in England, and then the king appoints them. So I'm going to continue to argue that American exceptionalism begins in Plymouth, not Jamestown. And for that reason, it doesn't matter that slaves were introduced into Jamestown. It's irrelevant because it's not the essence of American exceptionalism. That's the most obvious reason. The second most obvious reason is slaves were everywhere. Everybody had slaves. Everybody in the world had slaves. Nobody had emancipated slaves yet. The Muslims are the world's largest slave traders. So, for those two reasons alone, I think the 1619 project is full of schlockdoggerism, spoogism. It's just junk. It's just nonsense, because slaves had no bearing whatsoever on the exceptional nature of America. That came from bottom-up Christian, mostly Protestant religion, and bottom-up governance in the form of people electing their own rulers, as well as two other factors that we will get to later. I outlined those in the introduction. If you missed that, go back and watch the first video. All right, page 23, continuing. Virginians became embroiled in English politics, particularly the struggle between the Cavaliers, or the supporters of the king, and the Puritans. In 1649, the Puritans executed Charles I, whose forces had surrendered 3 years earlier. When Charles was executed, Governor William Berkeley and the Assembly supported Charles II as the rightful ruler of England, earning for Virginia the nickname Old Dominion. Parliament, however, was in control in England and dispatched warships to bring the rebellious pro-Charles Virginians into line. After flirting with resistance, Governor Berkeley and his Cavalier supporters ultimately yielded to the Puritan English parliamentarians. Then Parliament began to ignore the colony, allowing Virginia to assume a great deal of self-government. This is after 1619. After 1649. The new king, Charles II, the son of the executed Charles I, rewarded Berkeley and the Virginia Cavaliers for their loyalty. Berkeley was reappointed governor in 1660, but when he returned to his position, he was out of touch with the people and the Assembly, which had grown more irascible and was more intolerant than ever of religious minorities, including Quakers. At the same time, the colony's population had risen to 40,000, producing tensions with the governor that erupted in 1676 with the influx of settlers into territories reserved for the Indians. All that was needed for the underrepresented backcountry counties to rise against Berkeley and the Tidewater gentry was a leader. Now, let's put a pin in that for just a moment. You see, I jumped a bit from the 1620s and the execution of Charles to the 1660s. This is not a world history course. It's not an English history course. But what happened during that period? Oliver Cromwell took over, Puritan, took over as the protector, the Lord Protector of England. They called it the Protectorate. And this lasted for 10, 11 years until Cromwell died. His son took over and was not very popular and was kicked out, executed, and they brought back Charles II. So there's a gap of time happening over in England, where England is governed by Cromwell and the Puritans, mostly through the Parliament. Cromwell doesn't exercise a whole lot of direct control over the English colonies that I'm aware of. I can't remember too many instances when he did. He's usually acting through the Parliament at this time, which is a very Whiggish concept. We're going to see this later, that the Whigs, W-H-I-G-S, begin to develop as a party in England, a movement really, that emphasizes legislative dominance in government over the king, or in our case, a president. So the Whig tradition in American history is that legislatures should govern, not kings or presidents or premiers or prime ministers. Okay? All right, back to the story here. So we're at the header, Bacon's Rebellion, on page 23. Nathaniel Bacon, Jr., an eloquent and educated resident of Charles City County, had only lived in Virginia 14 months before he was named to the governor's council. A hero among commoners, Bacon nonetheless was an aristocrat who simmered over his lack of access to the governor's inner circle. His large farm in the west stood on the front line of frontier defense, and naturally Bacon favored an aggressive strategy against the Indians. But he was not alone. Many Western Virginians noting signs of unrest among the tribes. Petitioned Berkeley for military protection. Now, this is going to sound a little familiar, right? In the American Revolution, the Westerners out there in the western parts of Virginia and the Carolinas, other places, are needing protection from the Indians, and they petition the Crown, and the Crown keeps saying, you need to pay for this. This is your protection. You pay for it. In other words, well, we protect Englishmen in England or maybe in India, but we're not going to protect you in America. So this whole business about who protects whom from Indians is a long simmering discussion item, a long simmering debate topic in American history. Bacon went further, offering to organize and lead his own expedition against the Indians. In June 1676, he demanded a commission, quote, against the heathen, unquote, saying, quote, God damn my blood, I came for a commission, and a commission I will have before I go. Governor Berkeley, convinced that the colonists had exaggerated the threat, refused to send troops and rejected Bacon's suggestion to form an independent unit. Meanwhile, small raids by both Indians and whites started to escalate into larger attacks. By 1676, Bacon, despite his lack of official approval, led a march to track hostiles. Instead, he encountered and killed friendly Indians, which threatened to drag the whole region into war. From a sense of betrayal, he then turned his 500 men on the government at Jamestown. So he marches back to Jamestown and the governor there. Berkeley maneuvered to stave off a coup by Bacon when he appointed him general in charge of the Indian campaign. Satisfied, Bacon departed, whereupon Berkeley rescinded his support and attempted to raise an army loyal to himself. Bacon returned, and finding the ragtag militia scattered Berkeley's hastily organized force, whereupon Bacon burned most of the buildings in Jamestown. Folks, you want an insurrection? Look at Bacon's rebellion. It would be the equivalent of burning down Washington, D.C. He burned Jamestown, and he forced the governor to give him this commission. So that's what an insurrection looks like. No sooner had Bacon conquered Jamestown than he contracted a virus, probably not the China virus, but contracted a virus and died. Leaderless, Bacon's troops lacked the ability to resist. Berkeley and his forces, who bolstered by the arrival of 1,100 British troops, regained control of the colony. Berkeley promptly hanged 23 of the rebels and confiscated the property of others, actions that violated English property law and resulted in the governor being summoned back to England to explain his behavior. Reprimanded by King Charles, Berkeley died before he could return to the colony. All right, we're going on to the next header. The next header is the Maryland experiment. Although Virginia was a Protestant Anglican colony, I need to emphasize that it's technically called Protestant. Anglicans are called Protestant. They are not Protestants. Anglicans are not protesting anything. The Anglican Church was formed so that Henry VIII could have a hottie. He wanted Anne Boleyn, and he was married. And he said, if you don't let me have a divorce, I'll start my own church and give myself a divorce, which is what he did. So technically, we occasionally use the term Protestant church here, but it's probably not the most technically accurate term for the Church of England. Although Virginia was a Protestant Anglican colony, and it must be stated again that the London Company did not have a religious agenda per se, a second Chesapeake colony was planted in 1634 when George Calvert received a grant from Charles I. Calvert, who enjoyed strong personal support from the king despite his conversion to Catholicism in 1625, already had mounted an unsuccessful mission to plant a colony in Newfoundland. After returning from the aborted Newfoundland venture, Calvert worked to obtain a charter for the northern part of the Chesapeake Bay. Shortly after he died, the crown issued a charter in 1632 to Cecilius Calvert, George's son, naming George Calvert Lord Baltimore. The grant, named in honor of Charles I's wife, Queen Mary, gave Baltimore a vast expanse of land stretching from the Potomac River to the Atlantic Ocean. And this, of course, is Maryland. Calvert's grant gave him full proprietary control over the land. Okay, again, not elected. These people are not American exceptional because they aren't elected. It just shows you how special the Pilgrims were. Calvert acted rex in absentia as proprietor, the king in the absence of the king. And as long as the proprietor acted in accordance with the laws of England, he spoke with the authority of the crown. Calvert never visited the colony, though, governing the province through his brother Leonard, who held the office of governor until 1647. So this guy wasn't even here in America. Like Virginia, Maryland had an assembly created in 1635, elected by all freeholders, that is, everybody who had land. In March 1634, approximately 300 passengers arrived at one of the eastern tributaries of the Potomac and established the village of St. Mary's. Located on a high cliff, St. Mary's had a good natural harbor, fresh water, and abundant vegetation. Father Andrew White, a priest who accompanied the settlers, observed of the region that, quote, "We cannot set down a foot without but tread on strawberries, raspberries, fallen mulberry vines, acorns, walnuts, and sassafras." In other words, it's a very rich area, with lots of food. The Maryland colony was planned better than Jamestown. It possessed a large proportion of laborers and fewer adventurers, country gentlemen, and gold seekers, and the settlers planted corn as soon as they cleared the fields. Calvert, while not unaware of the monetary returns of a well-run colony, had another motive for creating a settlement in the New World. Catholics had faced severe persecution in England, and so Lord Baltimore expected that a large number of Catholics would welcome an opportunity to immigrate to Maryland when he enacted the Toleration Act of 1649, which permitted any Christian faith to be practiced in the colony. The act provided that, and I quote, "No person professing to believe in Jesus Christ shall from henceforth be in any ways troubled, molested, or discountenanced." Yet the English Catholics simply did not respond the way Calvert hoped. Thus, he had to welcome Protestant immigrants from the outset. Once the news of religious toleration spread, other religious immigrants came from Virginia, including a group of persecuted Puritans who established Annapolis. So isn't it interesting, one of the largest cities in Maryland was a Catholic colony. It was founded by Puritans. The Puritans proved a thorn in Baltimore's side, however, especially after the English Civil War put the Puritans in control there, and they suspended the Toleration Act. After a brief period in which the Calvert family was deprived of all rights to govern, Lord Baltimore was supported, ironically, by the Puritan Lord Protector of England, Oliver Cromwell, whom I mentioned earlier, and he was reinstated as governor in 1657. This is one of Cromwell's first actions over here in North America. Religious conflict had not disappeared, however. An early wave of Jesuits worked to convert all of the colonies, antagonizing the Protestant majority. Thus, in many ways, the attempt to permit religious toleration resulted in conflict and frequently bloodshed. Nor did the immigration of Protestants into Maryland allay the nagging labor shortage that was present. In 1640, Maryland established its own headright system, and still the demands for labor exceeded the supply. As in Virginia, Maryland planters solved the shortage through the use of indentured servants and, at the end of the 1600s, African slaves. Maryland enacted a law, quote, concerning Negroes and other slaves in 1664. So again, the first real slave laws don't come until the mid-1660s, long after the first slaves appear. This law not only perpetuated the slave status of those already in bondage, but extended the slave status to, quote, whosoever freeborn woman shall intermarry with any slave. So for the first time we get a hereditary slave law in the colonies. Maryland, therefore, with its large estates and black slaves, looked very much like Virginia. Now let me go back for just a second, talking about Governor Berkeley, and mention this. Against the powerful backdrop of Bacon's rebellion came a quiet but powerful transformation of the status of slaves. The first official slavery law in Virginia came in 1661, so again, we're just 3 years before Maryland. And by 1682, all non-Christian purchased servants were viewed as slaves. So it took 70 years, more or less, before the status of indentured servant and slave were really fixed into law, that they're not the same thing. A 1705 law banned slaves from owning personal property, making it almost impossible for a slave to gain manumission in Virginia. Manumission is where you work to gain your freedom. You free yourself, okay? To those who saw slavery up close in the South, a special appreciation of freedom took root. Slavery in others led Virginians to appreciate freedom for themselves, a sad but necessary first step in valuing freedom for all. And that assessment is brought to you by the great historian Edmund Morgan, who argues that, among other things, seeing slaves caused the Virginians and other Southerners to value their own freedom even more. And this becomes, we don't want to be like slaves. Dude, you own slaves. Yeah, I know, but we understand there's tremendous hypocrisy and tremendous double standard. Yes, we get all that. But history's slow, and the fact that they're already recognizing that slavery is not good is a major issue. This is not being viewed this way in Islam. Not at this time. Nobody in Islam is going, maybe we shouldn't own slaves. Maybe slaves kind of harm us too, having slaves. No, nobody's thinking that. Nobody's thinking that in Latin America. Nobody's thinking that of the serfs who really were slaves in Russia. So it's a pretty unique situation. Okay, let's continue moving on to the Carolinas, Charlestown, and Celtic culture. Carolina, England's final 17th century mainland slave society, was established in 1663 when Charles II chartered the colony to 8 wealthy proprietors. Their land grant encompassed the territories known today as North and South Carolina. It was just down in Greenville, South Carolina for a convention this last weekend. Although Charles's aim was to create a strategic buffer zone between Spanish Florida and Virginia, Carolina's proprietors instead sought agricultural riches. Charlestown, now Charleston, and South Carolina, founded in 1670, was populated largely by English Barbados planters and their slaves. Soon they turned portions of the sweltering Carolina seacoast into productive rice plantations. Then, over the next century, indigo, a vegetable dye, became the planters' second most important cash crop, thanks to the subsidies available to the mercantilist system. Definition time: cash crop. Cash crop refers to things that you grow that you can't eat. You have to sell them. So it's quite different from corn, where if you have trouble, you can at least eat your own corn. You can't do that with indigo. You can't do that with cotton. So as the South begins to steadily move toward cash crops, again, it develops a dependency on a group of people. First group are known as factors, F-A-C-T-O-R-S, and they are middlemen. So you come into town, you got all your wagons full of cotton, or you've got all these wagons full of rice, or wagons full of indigo. You need to get rid of them right then and there so you can get back to your plantation, back to your farm. Well, what happens if the ship isn't there where you can sell them directly to a captain? It's a problem. You can't just hang around and guard your stuff on the docks. So these middlemen known as factors appeared, and they would pay you for your crops and then hold them and then sell them to the ship's captains who were, or someone who was on the boat who was authorized to take possession of all the agricultural goods. Naturally, a tension built up with these factors. People don't like middlemen. You always think, well, I can do that myself. Well, you can't do it yourself, or you'd be doing it yourself. And so they always, whether it's the factors, whether it's the grain elevator operators in the late 1800s who operate these giant grain elevators, and the farmers come in, they always feel like they're getting price gouged by these guys for their holding fees. Middlemen are not popular. Factors are not popular. And increasingly, a lot of these factors began to come from the north. And so that was even worse. That made them even more unpopular, that you're selling your goods from the deep south here to somebody from the north. And it's a tension that will continue with us all the way up to the 1850s. I just thought I'd throw that out. From the outset, Carolina society was tri-racial. Blacks eventually constituted a majority of the Carolinians, followed by a mix of Indians and then Europeans. White Carolinians allied with Cherokee Indians to soundly defeat the rival Yamasees and Creeks and push them westward. Planters failed in their attempts to enslave defeated Indians, turning instead to black slaves to cultivate the hot, humid rice fields. A 1712 South Carolina statute made slavery essentially permanent. Quote, all Negroes, mulattoes, mestizos, that is blacks who have intermarried with whites, or Indians, which at any time heretofore have been sold, and their children, there it is, it's hereditary again, are hereby made and declared slaves, unquote. Slave life in the Carolinas differed from Virginia because the rice plantation system initially depended almost exclusively on an all-male workforce. Life in the rice and indigo fields was incredibly harsh, resembling the conditions in Barbados. The crops demanded full-time attention at harvest, requiring exhausting physical labor in the Carolina sun. I don't know if you've been to Carolina in the summertime. Mm-hmm. It's daunting. I mean, that's one reason I don't live in Florida. I live in Arizona because I just cannot take that humidity. 100 degrees with the humidity down there, 60 or 70, feels like 10,000 degrees out here in Arizona. So people joke out here, oh, it's a dry heat. Well, it's true, though. You go out and it's 105, and I'm serious, you don't notice it that much because it's a dry heat. And unless our humidity level gets up real high, it's not that unpleasant. But man, I've been in, my band was based out of Pascagoula, Mississippi, and I've been in the deep south in the middle of summer, and it's just sweltering. I mean, you feel like you need 15 showers a day. You take a shower, you go outside, and your clothes are sticking to you. You don't have energy. So you can imagine the incredible difficulty and pain and tortuous work it was to cultivate rice and indigo in the middle of summer in places like the Carolinas. It's just, you're surprised that anybody lasted at all, let alone just a few years. Most of these slaves had lifespans of 8 to 10 years after they get here. So it's really tough work. Yet colonial slave revolts, like the 1739 Stono Revolt, which sent shockwaves through the planter community, were exceptions, because the language barriers among the slaves, close and brutal supervision, a climate of repression, and a culture of subservience all combined to keep the rebellions infrequent. Let me just mention this. One of the reasons it becomes so difficult to enslave Indians is that two reasons. One, they pretty much spoke the same language if they were the same tribe. And two, they knew the land. So if they could escape and just get into the hinterland a little bit, they knew where they were going, and they knew other Indians in the area. Now, they weren't all friendly to each other, but, we understand that. So it became fairly easy for Indians to escape from slavery. But blacks from Africa were not only intermixed by tribe so that they could not speak to each other, but obviously didn't know the land if they escaped, didn't know where to go, and stood out. So it was much easier to recover runaway black slaves than it was ever to recover runaway Indian slaves or even indentured servants. And I kind of went over that last time, how the indentured servant escaped, and the guy had the wanted posters up throughout the city. Mm-hmm. The perceived threat, though, of slave rebellions hung over the southern coastal areas of the Carolina, where slaves often outnumbered whites 9-1. Many planters literally removed themselves from the site of possible revolts by fleeing to the port cities in the summer. It was also a little bit cooler in Charleston than it was upcountry. Charlestown soon became an island where planter families spent, quote, the hot season free from plantation swamps and malaria of the lowlands. By the mid-18th century, Charleston, with a population of 8,000, so this is a major American city, and it's pretty small, right? And major commercial connections, a lively social calendar of balls and cotillions, and even a paid symphony orchestra was the leading city in the South. Northern Carolinians differed socially and politically and economically and culturally from their neighbors to the south. In 1729, disputes forced a split into the two separate colonies. The northern part of the colonies was geographically and economically more isolated and developed more slowly than South Carolina. In the northeastern lowlands and Piedmont, North Carolina's economy turned immediately to tobacco, while a new ethnic and cultural wave trekked south from Pennsylvania into North Carolina via Virginia's Great Valley. German and Celtic Scots-Irish farmers added flavor to the Anglo and African stew of Carolina society. Germans who arrived were pious Quaker and Moravian farmers in search of opportunities to farm and market wood, leather, and iron handicrafts, whereas Celts were the wild and woolly frontiersmen who had fast worn out their welcome in the, quote, civilized and areas of Pennsylvania, Virginia. At that point, they moved on deeper and deeper into the forests of the Appalachian foothills and eventually into the Trans-Appalachian West. These are, of course, going to become the people we call the hillbillies, the rednecks, okay, the crackers. Such a jambalaya of humankind immediately made for political strife as eastern and western North Carolinians squared off time and again in disputes that often boiled down to planter versus small planter rivalries. So another factor we see in both North and South Carolina is as the new immigrants come in and as they move further and further west, fewer of them own large-scale plantations. Most of them are what we would call in the North small farmers. And so as slavery grows in influence and as the planters have more and more slaves, a tension develops here between the new immigrants who generally do not have slaves and farm their own land and the plantation owners who, of course, have the slaves farm their land. And so this is where we get this notion that in the Civil War that it was a rich man's war that was fought by poor men or something like that, some phrase like that. True to a large degree. And it's also true, as we will see by that time, that many, if not most, of those who were actually in the fighting ranks did not own slaves. But that, as we're going to find, is fairly irrelevant because there were other issues that led them to fight for slavery, even if they personally did not own slaves. All right. Life of the common colonials. By the mid-1700s, it was clear across the American colonies that settlers had become increasingly less English. Most colonials wore their hair long. Women and girls kept their hair covered with hats, hoods, and kerchiefs, while men and boys tied their hair into queues until wigs came into vogue in the port cities. Colonials made their own clothes from linen, flax, and wood. Every home had a spinning wheel and a loom, and women sewed and knitted constantly, since cotton cloth would not be readily available until the 19th century. Plentiful dyes like indigo, birch bark, and pokeberries made colorful shirts, pants, dresses, socks, and caps, sort of the early version of tie-dye t-shirts. Americans grew their own food and ate a great deal of corn, roasted, boiled, and cooked into cornmeal bread and pancakes, partly because wheat was so expensive. Hearty vegetables like squash and beans joined apples, jam, and syrup on the dinner table. And they were carnivores, they're carnivores. Two historians of eating in America noted, quote, game was not only the main meal of the colonists, it was often the main food. Men and boys hunted and fished rabbit, squirrel, bear, deer, venison, and were common entries. Pig raising became important, but beef, cows, and milk were scarce until the 18th century and beyond. Virginia colonists ate so much pork that a century later, planter William Byrd quipped that Virginians, quote, were extremely hoggish in their temper and prone to grunt rather than to speak. Given the poor quality of water, many colonials drank cider, beer, and corn whiskey, even children. As cities sprang up, the lack of convenient watering holes led owners to water their cattle with a runoff of breweries, yielding a disgusting variant of milk known as swill milk, which propagated childhood illnesses. Even without swill milk, infant mortality was high, and any sickness usually meant suffering and often death. Colonials relied on folk medicine and Indian cures, including herbs, tea, honey, bark, roots, supplemented with store-bought medicines. Doctors were few and far between. The American colonies had no medical school until the eve of the American Revolution, and veterinarians often doubled as the town doctor or vice versa. Into the vacuum of this absence of professional doctors stepped folk healers and midwives, quote, bone crackers and bleeders, what we would today call chiropractors. I should mention here that children died in infancy all the time. So it was quite common, even by the time of the American Revolution, for a wife to bear 8 to 10 live children, of whom only 4 to 5 might live. And it was also quite common, well up until the time of the American Revolution, not to name the baby until perhaps age 2, when it was christened. And at that time it was given a name. And until age 2, they would refer to it as the little visitor, the little stranger, the little angel, or it. Who's that in the next room? It. And so the colonists were quite attuned to the fact that death surrounded them all the time. And of course, childbirth quite often killed the mothers, which is why you frequently see these marriages of older men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or beyond to very young women in their teens, sometimes as young as 12 at this time.
And it was because a woman was expected to get pregnant so many times, women just wore out and and died. Um, the great wide receiver of the Dallas Cowboys, Michael Irvin, uh, he came from a family of 18. And I used to quip that when Mrs. Irvin died, her uterus should be bronzed and sent to the Smithsonian. I mean, it's a natural wonder to have 18 live children. Life was very, very tough, and of course you're doing it all yourself, and we're not even counting all the stuff besides diseases that can get you, such as wild animals or plants or snakes or whatever, storms. And so you have these bone crackers. I wanted to also mention this. These are the chiropractors of the early times, kind of like, well, let's see if I can make you feel better by popping your neck or popping your back, something like that. Going to a physician was usually the absolute last resort, as you can imagine, since without anesthesia, any serious procedures would involve excruciating pain and extensive recovery. Women especially suffered during childbirth, and infants often had such high mortality rates that babies were not named until age 2, as I just said. Instead, mothers and fathers referred to the child as a little visitor or even it. Despite the reality of this difficult life, it is worth noting that by 1774, American colonists had already attained a standard of living that far surpassed that found in most civilized parts of the modern world, probably England excepted. So, if you had any kind of serious problem that required surgery, they would, if possible, get you drunk. Um, Opium was known by then, but it wasn't very plentiful at all, so it's unlikely you're going to get any of that. And so if something had to be cut on, literally they would hold you down and put a rag or a leather strap between your teeth and cut on you. By about 1800, in England, for example, if you look in the Who's Who directory of doctors, the best doctors weren't the most skilled surgically, they were the surgeons who could operate the fastest, because the majority of deaths occurred due to trauma. I mean, somebody's got to take off your foot, with no painkiller. Are you kidding me? So it's very, very tough stuff. And like I say, you don't want to go to a doctor. They're going to pull your tooth. They're just going to tilt your head back and use pliers and pull your tooth out without any numbing. So it's I can tell you this is not fun. Okay, kind of a long story, but we got 3 minutes. In the mid-70s, I had season tickets to the Phoenix Suns basketball team. And one game, I won the only thing I've ever really won in my life, prize kind of thing. I won a year's supply of Coca-Cola. I was sitting in the lucky seat, and I won a year's supply of Coca-Cola. So I was living at my mother's house at the time, and they delivered to my mother's garage 140 cases of 6-packs of the old green bottles of Coca-Cola. Sugar, not Diet Coke. And I proceeded to drink those in about 8 months, a year's supply of Coke. So I promptly had 4 cavities. So I had to go see the dentist. And my mother, good old Oklahoma stock, tough woman, I was worried. It was my first experience with Novocaine and needle, and I was scared. She said, "Oh, you don't need to worry about that. I have my teeth done all the time, drilled without Novocaine. You don't need that." Well, she must know. So I go to this dentist. Now, this guy, he was an older guy. He had these pop bottle cap things for glasses, these really thick things. And he believed in taking the x-ray of you after he was finished, not before he started. Kind of like, where have I been, rather than where do I need to go? So he pulls out one of these giant needles. And I go, no. My mother said I don't need that. I'll do it without Novocaine. He goes, "Are you sure?" I said, "Oh, yeah." Well, I had 1, 2, 3, 4. And the first 3, honestly, weren't bad. I wouldn't do it again, but they weren't horrible. They were very surface cavities, and he got them without too much of a problem. But that fourth one was up here, and it was a deeper one. And he hit that nerve, and man, I came out of that dentist chair, and his kind, compassionate response was, "Hold still, damn it." So after that, man, I want everything. I want numbs it on the site where you're going to give me the numbing shot. I want the headphones. I want gas. I want yoga. I want everything. I don't even want to know I've been in the room. I just want to wake up in my car behind the steering wheel and go, oh, it's all over, right? But anyway, that was my experience with not having anesthetics. All right. Let's see. Where are we? Okay, this is a good place to stop. We're right at a good break here. And so we'll pick up here next time. We'll still be in the colonial South. And then we'll probably be getting to the Pilgrims and start up the Pilgrims next time here on Patriots History. So let me remind you, this is brought to you by wildworldhistory.com. If you need curriculum for high schoolers of any sort, even if you're a teacher or an educator, you need my curriculum because I teach everything in 22 video lessons. So these are things you can plug in with your class. You don't have to show them the whole video sometimes, but there's portions of the discussions you might want to show them. But for homeschoolers, it's a full curriculum, teacher's guide, student guide, tests. All the images I use in my videos are downloadable. Everything's downloadable, and there's no license to expire, which means that you can use it with as many kids as you want, as long as you want. $179 convention price here for the next couple of weeks. It's amazing. I mean, the videos alone are worth $179. The videos have a timeline up to the top right, and as I speak, a little globe appears, and it stays with me in time. 1642, 1676. Wherever I'm talking about in time, the little globe goes, so you're never out of time. You always know where I am in the discussions. And most of the videos are divided into 3 segments, about 15 minutes to 20 minutes each. So I suggest you teach the course in 3 hours a week. It's a 2-semester course, and that'll get you right through to 2018. And at 3 hours a week, you could show, for example, 20 minutes of the video and then do workbooks in the student workbook and reading for 40 minutes. Or you could show the video at the first of the week and then have the students do the workbooks. There's a lot of ways to do it. Also, check out the VIP subscription service. I have 4 ongoing lesson programs that are not a part of the curriculum. Reagan, the American President, 21 videos. Enduring Lessons on Life and Citizenship, 8 or 9 videos. The Horrible History of Howard Zinn, 3 videos. You want to look at that. And one of my best ones is 1620 Default. What I've been talking about with regards to why the 1619 project is full of poopy caca. Because really it's Plymouth in 1620 that is the default position. It's where American exceptionalism started. And I'm adding new stuff. Pretty soon I'm going to start adding America in the 21st century as part of the VIP. So subscribe to the VIP. It's only $6 a month, and there's so much free stuff. You could spend weeks looking at all the free stuff that's on the site too. Now, coming up here in about 15 minutes, we'll switch over to another stream on the Wild World of History channel, and I'll be doing Talking Politics with Larry Schweikart on Patriot Plus. And by the way, last thing, if you haven't seen our trailer for Patriots History, we made a 4-minute trailer of a video series we want to produce. It'll make you cry. It's so good. That's on my Twitter feed today. Take a look at that. And if we could get every single person who follows me on Twitter just to buy me a coffee at $5, just buy Larry a coffee, and there's a link on Twitter for that, we can make the pilot episode of Patriots History of the United States. And folks, I have connections with the people who made The Chosen, that we can get this in front of their test audiences, and they may very well fund the whole $2.5 million project if we can get them a pilot. So check it out. Buy me a coffee. Tell everybody you know, buy me a coffee. This is going to the Patriots History video pilot project. If we can get everybody on Twitter, all my 93,000 people, we'd be able to make that, and I can make it in 9 months. I've got the people set up and ready to go. So I'll see you guys in about 15 minutes. Until Wednesday, bye from Patriot's History.